Welcome to episode 12 of the Movement Logic podcast. I'm Dr. Sarah Court, physical therapist, and I'm here with my guest who probably needs no introduction to most of you, Jules Mitchell. Jules is a Las Vegas-based yoga teacher, educator, and massage therapist with an MS in exercise science and biomechanics from CSU Long Beach. She is adjunct faculty at Arizona State University, where she serves as a yoga consultant on yoga therapy research for special populations, including pregnant women, perinatal loss and depression, and cancer patients. Jules is the author of Yoga Biomechanics Stretching Redefined, a comprehensive text for yoga teachers. Her methods intend to achieve ease in movement through deliberate effort. Thus, her teachings integrate numerous modalities, balancing the somatic aspects of yoga with the most current exercise science. Today, we're talking about all sorts of things. I was trying to think of a title for the episode, and I was like, everything? Because if you know anything about Jules, you know that she is a total genius. And so asking her on the show was just a very selfish move on my part, because I just wanted to pick her brain about yoga, strength training, bone density, and just sort of movement fads in general. So Jules, welcome. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
I love that you read my bio that I've been wanting to update for like 2 years and haven't got around to it. Like
whenever
move that up on the list of priorities.
Yeah.
I know. Might happen tomorrow now.
I've had that happen too, where I'm like, oh, that's old.
Yes. It's okay. None of it's incorrect. So
yeah, it's still technically it's all still true.
Yes.
So is there anything that you know, in your various and I was gonna say various and varied, but that means the same thing, in your various studies lately, that you're kind of really interested in, something that you're kind of fascinated by at the moment?
I mean, it's not like one thing in particular. I have definitely started on a path of my own continuing education that is separate from kind of the narrative that I've been driving for a long time, which is like soft tissue mechanics, just to get some other perspectives, because there are a lot of different explanations within a lot of different models for a lot of the same things. Mm-hmm. And so I have been kind of putting myself into those other models. So I've been doing some like joint mechanics research. I've been doing a little biochemistry studies. I've been doing a bit of little biotensegrity. Like I took a non-Euclidean geometry math course just to kind of like verse myself in the competing narratives to mine. And it's been really fulfilling and interesting.
That's very cool. That's very cool.
Yeah.
You generally at this point, and correct me if I'm wrong, you mostly teach sort of continuing education for movement teachers, yoga teachers mostly.
Yeah.
Do you miss teaching like just general gen pop classes, like public classes? Because I when I started practicing as a clinician, and I, you know, would still teach a workshop here and there, but every now and then I'm like, it'd be fun to just teach like a yoga class. You know,
well, I kind of do teach yoga classes. I don't teach to the general public, but I do have like practice collections, which are like miniature libraries of online classes. So I do get in front of my camera and teach a yoga class, or I do teach. My teacher training started this week. I taught a yoga class. So I'm still teaching classes. It's just I'm teaching with the teacher in mind. So they're a little bit more sophisticated. Like sometimes I'll weave together 3 or 4 different skills in a class, knowing that the yoga teacher will then take that class and break it down into like 5 or 6 classes, different classes that they could offer the general population, you know? So I kind of layer them heavy with educational concepts. So I don't really miss teaching the general public, because I kind of do, even though it just has a little bit of an edge to make it, you know, more in line with what I do. And also I just have to say, I'm so overwhelmed with running an online business since, you know, we've all been forced to go there. I'm not missing anything. Like I'm not sitting around going, you know, I have all this extra time and I'd really like to, like I have plenty to keep me busy. So
Yeah.
it's okay the way
Yeah.
it is. And I'm still teaching.
Nice. Do you feel like your classes, are still, I don't know, like quote unquote recognizable as a yoga class? Or, or does that matter, or what would that even look like, or how important is it that it conform in that way? I feel like there's a lot of variety out there now, and I think we've gotten a
Yeah.
little less precious about what exactly a yoga class, quote unquote, should look like.
I would say that it's probably more recognizable about as yoga now than it has been in the past. I think there is so much variety that I think a lot of yoga teachers are a little confused. They don't know what to call themselves. They're calling themselves movement teachers. The general public has no idea what movement means. They just want to find a yoga class, So I feel like I don't oppose all that, and I don't oppose incorporating other things into yoga. I don't in any way, but just like for my business and for clarity and to be there to help yoga teachers find their way through yoga, it's like more yoga now than ever before.
Yeah.
Maybe not ever before, obviously, but over the last 5 years, let's just say that's very recognizable as yoga. I mean, I do have, I do incorporate some somatic stuff, but it's for the poses.
Right.
It's not for mobility drills. It's for the poses.
Right. And this kind of takes me into my next question, because there's been so much focus that I've seen, at least in the yoga teacher world, about strength suddenly. And, in my sort of broad clinical definition of strength, I think strength training involves an external load. That external load is greater than your day-to-day demands, that you can, move it however it is, whether it's a squat or an overhead press or something, but there's only a limited number of times that you can do it. And, while the yoga community has grown more interested in strength training, which I think is great, how do we then, bridge the gap or get better understanding between what strength training is and what happens in a yoga or a Pilates class? Is it fair? Is it accurate if a yoga teacher is saying that's like, here's my yoga for strength training, or I don't know what people are calling their classes, but, and again, does that sort of very, very specific academic accuracy matter? What do you think?
Yes and no. I think it depends. I know it's always depends, but what does it depend on? It kind of depends on the stakeholders in the conversation. Do you know what I mean? Like, if you're just trying to reach the general public, I don't think the general public cares if it's strength or not strength. They just want to do what they want to do and feel better or feel stronger. And if they feel stronger because they went to yoga and did a bunch of vinyasas, or if they, I don't think it matters to regular people who can barely fit into their schedule an hour or two of what they would consider exercise or whatever, So I think we can get very wrapped up in like industry, I call it industry pageantry. And I don't think that's serving our customer, like the person who really just needs an hour of yoga. I don't think it matters if they think TheraBands are strengthening or not strengthening, unless they're truly seeking strength training. Then we can guide them and say, maybe you want to go find a strength and conditioning coach or something like that. But if they're just trying to fit it into their routine, I don't think it matters. I do think it matters when we are talking amongst ourselves. I do think as professionals in the industry, we should have clear understandings of what the parameters are to make something a strength practice if we're going to be using that language. And then when you're educated on that and when you understand it, then it just naturally bleeds into the way you talk to your customer without trying to rearrange their ideas of things that they don't really care about. I always use like the accountant example. Accountants need to know the tax laws, and they need to know them so well that when you come to bring them your taxes, they just give you the advice they can hear what you need and give you the advice. They don't explain the tax law to you. You would lose your mind, right? So
Right.
it's kind of like that. Like we need to be very well informed, so well informed that we can tease out what our customer is looking for and what they want and what their goals are and point them in the right direction without explaining to them the nuance on why a TheraBand isn't a proper strengthening tool. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, then, so let's say, if a teacher had someone come up to them after class and the class had some resistance bands in it, and the student was like, "Is this going to make me stronger?" Because I mean, I just remember getting a lot of very vague, general questions like that a lot of the time, where I'm like, "Well, do you want the half an hour answer?"
I would say probably not. You know, you might feel stronger because you got a little workout, there's a little, whatever, but like it probably isn't going to meet the parameters for actual strength. But if you feel good, so you can answer them in 2 sentences, I think. If you're looking to build muscle mass or something like that, like this probably isn't it.
Right.
If you've been quite sedentary for a long time, this is probably a really great place to start, like stuff like that.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I mean, I think about the patients that I work with in the clinic. I mean, we're not starting with like a 25 kettlebell goblet squat, like nothing near that. And is it, in these early stages where we're using like, the yellow resistance band or the very small hand weight, am I thinking about that like I'm making this person stronger, or am I thinking about that like, well, I'm really what I'm helping them do is motor control, motor planning, like this sort of, and you talked about in the beginning about how you're exploring other areas around the sort of soft tissue explanation for things. My sort of recent biggest nerd out is just about how I really think the nervous system is just in charge of everything. And so something like hypertrophy is one thing, but something like helping someone find their serratus anterior, if they can't do it with just their arm, they're not going to be able to do it with a 20-pound kettlebell. So we start with the yellow band, and we start with a lot of repetition and a lot of sort of like planning and programming and all that kind of stuff. Is that strength? I don't know. Maybe not technically, but they're not going to get the strength if they don't know where it is. Right.
Yeah.
So maybe there's a way to talk about.
So there's one model, right? So you just explained like one model, one approach, of progression towards strength training. There's other models too. And multiple models can be true at the same time, or maybe not true, nothing's true, but you know what I mean, can be effective
They can
at
coexist.
the same time. They can coexist, and even though they might contradict each other, but this is biology, so we actually don't know anything anyway.
Right.
But yeah, so is it part of a program that could lead someone to getting stronger? Sure, you could say that easily.
Right. The other thing that I am seeing a lot of lately is the focus on like bone density and osteoporosis, and classes that are called yoga for osteoporosis. And I'm not trying to like pick on yoga teachers. It's just the world that I know. There's probably like Pilates classes that are called Pilates for osteoporosis. Yes.
There are many.
Yeah. And similarly to strength training, I mean, it just makes me I feel a little twitchy when I see stuff like that, because I look at it and I'm like, well, from a clinical perspective, the PT perspective is you're doing, short, sustained, very heavy loads, like strength training, maybe even more into the category of what we'd call power or something like that, where it's, you're, and, again, in a yoga class, that's, it's body weight. It's a resistance band. Maybe I've never seen anything more than like a, 2-pound hand weight. And I did read there's that Lauren Fishman study from 2016 that showed yoga increasing bone mineral density, but like a lot of studies, it was very specific population, very specific parts of the bones, and it was a 2-year study. Like there were a lot of things about it that were sort of research limitations, and even they were sort of like more studies are needed. But there is there's a program out there, I think, where people are just like, oh, it's this 12-minute yoga program and it's going to reverse your osteoporosis. And I just like, stop talking to me about fat-free cookies. Like it's one of those things where I feel like it's a sort of sales pitch a little bit. Do you have a better understanding than I do about the effect of yoga on bone mineral density? Do you think it's fair to for a teacher interpret the research as like, now I can say that my yoga class is for osteoporosis?
This is such a big topic. So it is my strong bias that yoga does not provide the parameters, the load parameters that reverse osteoporosis.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a really big claim in that paper. And that even just if you're not even in the stages of osteoporosis, just like building bone density, it's my very strong bias that yoga is not that. That being said, once a week, probably somebody emails me online course referencing this, whatever, literally once a week. Even my teaching assistant Instagrammed me one like 2 days ago. I was like, I know, I get it every week, because there's a huge push for it. There's books published on it. There's New York Times articles published on it. There's online courses for it, written by, or the courses and the books written by the people in the study that conducted the study. And we use that study in my teacher training because we look at its challenges. It's a very poor quality study, if you ask me. I read a lot of research, and I actually think it's important for yoga teachers who want to cite research to not just read high quality papers, but to read poor quality papers as well, because it helps them tease out like what's missing. The methods, it's an observational, longitudinal study. That's already problematic, especially when you're just looking at biology. And there's so many conclusions that can't be made from that, but in this paper that are, I have so many issues with it. There's literally one sentence in that paper that says, we controlled for all other variables as best as possible. And then they continued talking about something else. I'm like, well, what are they? And how did you?
Right.
Like, that to me isn't good enough, So I really struggle with that paper. I've talked about it on other podcasts. Lauren Fishman has requested those podcasts come down. Like, it's been a thing,
Yeah.
And I'm telling you all this because I had to preface it with my bias.
Yeah.
And I've read all kinds of other research on bone density. There's case studies out there that say yoga causes fractures. And you shouldn't do yoga. It's bad for people with osteoporosis. And then this paper says it reverses osteoporosis. And then you look at some higher quality randomized control trials and you see it's generally safe, but it doesn't improve bone density. Like, if you're looking at the whole body of literature, and you throw out, imagine you're doing a Cochrane review, that Fishman paper wouldn't make it in the review. It just wouldn't, you know what I mean? It wouldn't make it into a systematic review, and neither would the case studies. And so you're now looking at the higher quality research papers, and
Can I pause you for a second? Just for any of our listeners who don't know what a systematic review is, can you describe what that is?
Yeah, just a systematic review is a paper that looks at other research and reviews it. And they take the time to look at the quality of the papers. They throw out ones that don't really add to the conversation. Usually they start with they search and find thousands of papers, and they end up with 6 papers that are good enough to consider. So that tells you that just because it's published, you can't take one study and be like, oh, hey, look, 12 minutes of yoga reverses osteoporosis. If you read that study, also, they didn't do 12 minutes of yoga a day. It ended up being like 2 or 3 days a week. It was just like, every time you keep reading, you're like, well, this is, less and less what's in the abstract as you go through. But anyway, so if you're looking at some of the higher quality studies that would be eligible for a systematic review, yoga's fine. It's very few adverse events. Of course, things happen. Things happen when you get out of bed, though. So it's, generally it's safe, but it's not really what you're looking for. Now, that being said, there are probably other aspects of yoga, like improving balance and things like that. And so maybe reducing falls or quality of life. There's all kinds of other good benefits, but that's not measuring bone density. So making a claim, that yoga is good for bone density or builds bone or reverses osteoporosis, to me is a stretch.
Yeah.
Now, someone in my mentoring program was emailing me back and forth on this. She also emailed me one of these online courses. Hey, have you seen this? It showed up in her inbox. And she said to me in the email, I just don't understand how they can get it so wrong. And so my answer to her was, well, maybe we have it wrong. I mean, like I have to acknowledge that I'm reporting on all of this through a strong bias. So I'm willing to listen to the arguments. I really am, because even though I don't think it is, but you have to show up with a strong paper and some strong evidence. And in the meantime, I'm going to hold my position, and you share that position.
Yeah. I mean, that was sort of my feeling when I was looking at it. I was just sort of like, I don't know about this, and I think, just to sort of go slightly tangential, I think one of the things that I am often frustrated by is when that there is now this kind of willingness, which is amazing, of a lot of teachers to read research papers, which was not something that was happening when I started out as a yoga teacher. It's just, you just did yoga and shut up about it. So now people are trying to sort of find this more scientific evidence. At the same time, there's no training for yoga teachers in how to read research and how to actually assess the quality of the research and decide
what
for
I
themselves.
do.
Right. Can you talk about that a little bit? How you help teachers understand that not all research is created equal?
Yeah. I mean, that is what we do a little bit in my teacher training. I do a lot more in my mentoring program, because I think it's important. The more, like you said, the more people are throwing around research papers on social media, they're like, oh, look, stretching makes you weaker. It's like, well, wait a minute, let's look at this. Like they're doing a 100-yard dash and they're slower, and they're doing a high jump and they don't jump as high because they stretched for 6 weeks and didn't run or jump. So is it the stretching or is it the deconditioning? So what I kind of like to do when I'm working with teachers on reading research is I actually like to have them go to the methods. I think that is a really helpful way. And can they read the methods and can they recreate the study? If they had 20 people and they were to give them the intervention, take the measurements before, take the measurements after, and if they could recreate that in their mind, how were they being stretched, in what position, what was it like, were they using this, were they using that, what was considered the end range, was it this much sensation, how are they calculating that? And if they can recreate it like in their mind, then they have an understanding of what was studied. And when you have an understanding of what was studied, then you can start to think about what the results mean. And so, like, if you're looking at a lot of yoga studies, you don't actually know what they did. There's very little information about, like, oh, there was a 5-minute warm up, and then they did 50 minutes of breathing and poses, and then they did a cool down. Well, if you can't recreate that, then you actually can't take those conclusions and make any meaning out of it.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. I love that I think that'd be amazing for a lot of people. I think, my thing was always sort of like, if you're posting the, New York Times article that's talking about the research, that you really have to go and find the paper and read the paper. And at that level, does the kind of like clickbaity article title actually describe what's happening in the paper? And my finding a lot of time was that it wasn't. Like, it actually did not reflect accurately what the paper actually was even trying to study. But again, it's more, you're going to get more clicks if you say something really provocative, like stretching makes you weaker or something like that. But yeah, really, I think I love that you're doing that, because I really do think it's so important that people, I mean, we did a ton of it at school, but prior to that, I didn't know that much about, what's a good study, what's not a good study, so yeah. There's also so much statistics in it that just makes me completely cross-eyed, but I do think you can.
Well, that's the next part, is really, at the end of the day, if you don't understand the statistics, it's really hard to interpret the research. So I don't expect that for yoga teachers. So that's like my goal with giving, providing scientific literacy skills to a yoga teacher isn't that they need to start taking statistics classes but just like, it's not about being able to understand a paper fully. It's about understanding how to think about a paper, right? So like I'm going to think about this paper about yoga and bone density, and let me question where it might be missing some stuff, and let me question where it actually, might have some valid points, and let me think about it instead of just seeing the headline or reading the abstract and saying, this is what it does. Like the stretching makes you weaker. Well, in this study, if it was a good quality study, maybe it did make you weaker, but that doesn't mean that going to yoga makes all people weaker, because the yoga intervention doesn't look anything like the stretching and the test for, weakening and strengthening and stuff. Well, no one's doing 100-yard dash or a high jump. So like, that's what, just think about the research.
Right.
And if you learn to do that, you kind of soften, I guess, like you soften your viewpoints. You recognize, like, you have a bias. I have a clear bias around yoga and osteoporosis, but I'm soft about it, instead of like arguing with people. It's like, they send me this course and I'm like, yes, here we are. This is the world of capitalism. Everyone's selling something, like, but I could, create a course that, yoga, the anti-osteoporosis for, yoga course or whatever, but it's okay.
Right.
It's okay. I'd still rather have people with osteoporosis do yoga than nothing else. So like,
sure. Absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm like, I just want you to stand up.
Yeah.
Like if you
live your life.
That, I'm happy. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. However you want to move your body.
Yeah.
Do you think, I mean, one of the things is I'm sort of, looking at these trends of talking about strength training, talking about osteoporosis in, yoga or movement teachers. And it seems like there is this sudden interest, and the people that I'm looking at are my peers in age, at least. And so I'm wondering if it's because we're all coming up to this point where we are perimenopausal, or some of us are fully menopausal, and we're dealing with concerns around strength training and bone density. Is this purely reflecting of, a generation of yoga teachers who are now, their concerns, their interests have changed? I don't know the average 28-year-old, 30-year-old yoga teacher, but I don't know if they're out there, talking about bone density in yoga, or if they're just doing what I was doing, which was like, hey, put your leg behind your head. We're cool. Like, do you think it's like, it's a generational thing?
Yeah. When we were 28-year-old yoga teachers putting our leg behind our head, there was a generation our age doing what we're doing now. We're not the first ones to discover this. I promise you that. That's a very egotistical place to be if we think that, we're not the first ones to discover, oh, wait a minute, maybe adding a little strength to my, is good for me. So there was a generation before us, and probably a generation before that, and probably a generation before that. As long as exercise science and physio and all this has been an industry, I would say that's probably the case. We are in our echo chamber, I do think that because of social media, the message of this generation that you're talking about spreads a little further. I think before, when I was 28 teaching yoga, there was no social media. So we had Blackberries at the time, maybe not even that yet. There was barely internet. I remember in my yoga teacher training, like, we were looking at Yoga Journal magazines, like, not, on a bookshelf and making Xerox copies of them. We were not emailing articles to each other. That was not a thing. So I do think that the message spreads faster and wider, and I think if we'd had social media, we would have had access to, the generation above us that was, sharing this information, doing podcasts, things like that. So it might feel like it's, spreading, but I do think that, the 25-year-olds practicing hot vinyasa are very happy there. I took a class recently in town. I was like, oh my God. I mean, I had a great time. I just went slower than everybody else, but it was like it's alive and well.
Yes. No, I have no doubt. I haven't taken one of those in a long time, and I bet it would be really entertaining. And
it was great.
I bet I would be, in the corner doing my, what I jokingly call my feeble old lady yoga, and the room would be like, what? Why isn't she doing the fifth
Very
headstand
fast.
that we're all doing, you know?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, it's so
It
funny.
was
Are we
great
just
though.
getting old? Is that what's happening?
Yeah.
Maybe.
I'm so glad. Finally.
Right? I know.
I've
Some
been
of it,
wanting
I'm
to
just
be
like,
an
oh,
adult since I was 10 years old.
I
So
know.
I'm going in the
I
right
know.
direction.
It's such a relief sometimes. Oh my God. Um, so, so back in the day, back in the, when we were photocopying pictures out of yoga journal and taking notes by hand. One of the things when I went back to PT school that blew my mind was as a total aside, but I was like, people are taking notes on their computer.
Mhm.
I was there with like my 5 different colored pens and my little notebook, and I was like, well, the title has to be, and then I look around and everyone else is like, clack, 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 clack. And I was like, oh,
Mhm.
I am the old here.
Mhm.
But so back in the day when that was how I was working, there was a lot of sort of different ways that you could structure a yoga class, but a lot of it was around like you're working towards a peak pose. A peak pose is an advanced pose, and it may also have been. I started in Jiva Mukti yoga, which is, as someone once lovingly described to me, that rock and roll shit. So I was like, I mean,
I'm
this is
familiar.
fair. So there wasn't a concept that like maybe not everybody should be doing 3 wheel poses and a 10-minute shoulder stand. And it does seem like, and again, this may be just generational, that like people are starting to pull back from this idea of like, oh, an advanced yoga is a complicated yoga. It's a physically advanced. And people are talking a lot about things like overstretching and hypermobility, and people are concerned about like this idea that they could overstretch something, or they're already too flexible. They don't need to be stretching anymore, all that kind of stuff. And at the same time, like as people ask me, they're like, do you give people stretches for part of their rehab program in a PT setting? And I'm like, yeah, absolutely, I do. But it's very specific. It's to very specific patients usually, and it's with a specific goal that's not necessarily range of motion related. It's not necessarily, trying to get their range better, but it might be more about helping with pain, helping them just move better generally, things like that. And you have a whole book about stretching. It's not just that is a huge
It is about stretching. It is. You're not wrong.
Well, it sounds like I'm just like, well, it's a book where you learn how to stretch. It's so much more, so much more. If you guys have not read Jules' book, you absolutely should. But when people ask you like, should I be stretching at this point, do you have an answer? Do you say like, maybe not, yes, no, here's why?
I usually say yes.
Mm-hmm.
People like stretching. It feels good.
They do.
It feels good. It really does. There's so many things around stretching that aren't just range of motion. There's so many things around it. I mean, if you dive into the stretching research, and I have a 3-hour webinar just on this, but like if you dive into that, there's dozens of variables that they're measuring, from quality of life to range of motion to tendon stiffness to sports performance to cardiovascular health to metabolic factors, stress hormones. Like there's like so many things. So yeah, stretching is great and fine. Your question had so many things, so I'm just trying to organize them. I do think there are certain populations, like you mentioned, hypermobility, where stretching doesn't feel that great.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think I don't think it's the stretching. Like they probably won't overstretch themselves. It's just like, your end range is your end range, like there's aside from extreme situations, it's really hard to, overstretch tissue, but they do have different composition of their structure of their connective tissue. And I think it's really, the reality is when they do like stretching, like the general public thinks of stretching, like a flexibility exercise, they're not able to sense tension. Mm-hmm. And so that's why they might not like the feeling of those stretches. So when they like engage muscles and stuff, and they all of a sudden everything feels more stable. But guess what? When you contract your muscle, you're still it's still tension. So it's not the tension, it's not the stretching, I'm using air quotes for that. It's not the stretching that's a problem. It's just the parameters around the stretch, or the details around the stretch, because when they end up, like, everything is a stretch. You can't, like, a deadlift is a stretch. You're bending over. And so when they actually, like, add some load, they're actually getting more stretch technically, because more tension, because there's more muscle contraction. So it's just, that's the condition in which they enjoy the tension, if that makes sense, where it feels better for them. So I've kind of, like, gone back and forth on this a lot, but I'm really kind of pro stretching. If I don't think you should use stretching to, improve your marathon time, or, those types of things. But if you enjoy it, then great. And I do think that taking away the emphasis of range of motion, if we just do that, it sort of resolves itself. If you just start kind of looking at it like, oh, it feels good to reach my arm overhead and reach for the cookie jar. That's a stretch, but if you're like, if you're pushing to end range, where you might start to aggravate some stuff, sensitize some stuff, then all of a sudden we're like, oh, stretching is the worst. And the only thing that was in that conversation is that we're, like, trying to get more, and you don't always need more. You could do a gentle stretch, not very far, and then engage your muscles, and all of a sudden it feels like a way deeper stretch, even though you haven't gone deeper. So you can play around with the sensations of tension and get all the benefits. People like it.
It does feel good. I mean, I think there is that there was, like, this conflation, is that the right word, where we took the idea of, trying to do these more, for lack of a better word, gymnastic, more complicated yoga poses. And we were like, oh, but the problem with that is I'm overstretching, right? Or that was that the two things were the same, and to your point, I mean, I tore a hamstring doing what's called Vishvamritasana. Like, I was like, well, maybe the problem is that you're trying to put your leg behind your head, like, maybe it's not a question of just situation. And what?
As an extreme position, situation.
Exactly. It wasn't because I was stretching my hamstring. It was because I was taking my body and I was just kind of trying to wedge it into a shape, because that's what everybody else in the room was doing, and all that kind of stuff.
Maybe it was the whole hip joint that wasn't ready for that, and the tendon was the sacrificial tissue. Do you know what I'm saying? Like,
totally.
That's where all these, the first question you asked, like, all the other things I'm studying, like, I have my explanations for soft tissue stretching, and I'm starting to, like, layer on other models, because there's a lot of things that could play a factor in that.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, there's people that I work with where, yes, we're doing strength. Our focus for them is getting strength back into their body, but we may start our session with 5-10 minutes of static stretching, because even if that were to, decrease the output for an Olympic weightlifter, it's not an issue for my client where we're going to be doing bridges, like, I think it's that kind of thing as well, where there's this idea where people take, and to your point, again, what you were saying previously, it's context based, right? So it's not relevant in this situation. She's not trying to PR her bridge.
They're taking elite athlete research and applying it to, the general population who's coming to your yoga class straight from the office, like, whatever, they're fine.
Yeah. And it does seem like, Laurel and I have talked about this, how so much of the research is, on athletes, and it's just frustrating to, like, I'm like, if I read another study that starts with, we took 20 college age male athletes, and I'm just like, ugh. And what, they were fine? Sure. It's tough. So, I mean, this is a kind of goofy question, but I just wanted to ask you what you thought. Like, we see all these movement fads come and go. I mean, fat-free cookies to me is just my, it's not a movement fad, obviously, but I just remember it well when everyone was obsessed with, like,
the Snackwells.
Yep.
The Snackwell era.
And then suddenly everyone realized, like, oh, maybe this is a terrible idea. But, in the movement world, there are also trends that come and go. We can think about, like, the 80s and the 90s, and we think about, like, aerobics and step class and things like that, which I did both of. And then from my perspective, at least, there was kind of a big, maybe sort of like in terms of how the country, or there were certainly people doing it before, but there was sort of a big yoga explosion kind of in the 90s and into the 2000s, where suddenly it was like, well, Madonna and Sting are doing yoga, and like, so is everybody in New York, and you want to be like going to class and all that kind of stuff. And, you know, it does seem like now people are starting to see the value in not just like, oh, I'm doing my yoga and I'm doing strength training, but just sort of like doing a lot of different things. Like certainly when I was practicing yoga, there was a sort of generally held belief that all you needed to do was practice yoga because it took care of all of your, you know, health and wellness needs. And I think, you know, even if teachers aren't necessarily putting, you know, resistance bands in their classes, they're at least aware that yoga is not the be all and end all for every single thing that your body may need. What do you think we're shifting towards next? Like, do you think there's going to be some new, is there a thigh master in the future that I just don't know about yet?
Probably.
Remember the thigh master?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
It was
there
a
probably
hinge.
is. Uh-huh. Yeah, exactly.
It was a big hinge that you could do one exercise with.
Yeah, right. I know. I think there's like definitely cycles, you know, like eccentrics are really popular right now, and they've been popular before. Like, I do think that we recycle stuff. I mean, nothing's that original, you know. Even a new piece of equipment is a modification of an old piece of equipment. You know, there's music today, there's not much that's original. Fashion, there's not much that's original. There's an original twist on things, but you know, there's a lot of sampling, so to speak.
Right.
And I think what's happening now is, you know, the yoga studio model was really successful because there really wasn't much else. There was, you know, aerobics and like body pump and things, but you had to go to the gym. But this sort of boutique-y studio model, and I think that's what, I mean, yes, yoga was trendy, but I think it's accessibility to people driving home from work and, you know, that kind of thing. You know, classes in the evening after work, there was a social aspect to it. I'm still friends today with the friends I met in my 20s at the yoga studio, where we still get together. And so I think that model exploded and more people came to yoga because there was a yoga studio everywhere. It was very easy to do. And now that model has moved into other areas. There's like cycling classes like that. And you know, there's these boutique studios that have like Orange Theory. I think you run on a treadmill, you know, and like here we have like these true fusions, and there's yoga and there's Pilates and there's kettlebells and there's spin and there's, you know, there's like all the, and so the studio model exists in other forms of exercise, including kettlebells. And so I think like that is where we're going. And so to me, it's not like what's next. I kind of think we already have all the exercises out there, you know, there's like, but it's really, what's it going to look like next? Like, what's the market? How's the market going to serve the customer? And it's really unknown right now because a lot of studios have closed. Some people are used to now doing yoga at home. You know, you can't really do that, like a lot of the other types of classes at home the way you can with yoga. I think yoga is really, so I don't know what's going to happen, but I think that that's where my interest lies. Like if I'm going to be watching the trends, it's not on like what's the next new widget that's going to be invented, but really like what is the market demand? How do people want to consume this? Do they want to go to big commercial gyms, or do they want small group classes at a little private gym? Or do they want, now we all have equipment at home, you know, like I know Laurel does a kettlebell class on, you know, online. Do we just want to do our kettlebell class at home? Do we want to do a pull-up class, a pull-up club? You know, my friend Catherine Bruder Young does one of those. You know what, how's it going to look more than what is it? That's my interest.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I think it is an unknown at the moment, because I think we are, you know, obviously with everything that's happened over the past couple of years, a lot of models just stopped working in a lot of ways. And unfortunately for a lot of people.
And some of us don't want to go back, you know, like
a lot of people don't
So,
want to go back. I know a lot of people that teach exclusively online now and are very happy with it and don't miss the hassle of the drive and the whatever and all that kind of stuff. You know, I am, I look friendly, but I'm actually really quite curmudgeonly. And all the whatever workshops I taught online, I was so happy to just be like goodbye and turn it off and not have to talk to anybody at the end. So, I think there's pluses and minuses to both, but I do think, ultimately long term, that community that we all sort of gravitated towards, whether it was specifically around yoga, whether it was just more about having like a studio where people knew you and you felt like it was like the Cheers bar, but it was for health activity. I mean, I think that maybe is something that some people miss a lot, and want to get back to.
Some people need.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me today and talking about all this stuff. Do you have anything coming up that you'd like our listeners to know about?
I'm always running something. I have something to sell all the time. So there's nothing specifically, off the top of my head, but there's things available. So, I run my Science of Stretching webinar twice a year. It's in every January, every July. I have a teacher training, I have a mentoring program. If you want to learn to read research, join that. There's always offerings on my website. Excellent. There's no shortage.
And we'll put a link to your website in our show notes for sure.
Perfect. That's it. That's all I need. Yeah.
A note to you listeners, you can check out the show notes for exactly what I just talked about, links to any references we mentioned, also to Jules's website. You can also visit the Movement Logic website where you can get on our mailing list to be in the know about sales on our tutorials. If you want to watch the video version of this episode and you see what Jules and I look like when we're thinking, and my recording studio, which is just a closet, let's be real, you can go to movementlogictutorials.com/podcast. Thank you so much for listening. It helps us out so much. If you like this episode, to please subscribe and rate and review either on iTunes. It's not iTunes anymore. It's Apple Podcasts. I have to wrap my brain around it. Or wherever you get your podcasts. We would really appreciate it. And please join us again next week for more Movement Logic and our loosely held opinions and strong ideas.